Hello, and welcome to Ground Effect Aviation Private Pilot Ground School. My name is Sean Parsons. I am an advanced ground instructor and instrument ground instructor based out of Salt Lake, Utah, and I will be your instructor throughout this course. Today, we're going to start off by going over Lesson 1, Regulatory Agencies, under Module 1, Pilot Qualifications. The reason that we want to start off by introducing regulatory agencies to you is that as you continue your flight training through ground school, as well as your flight training through your certified flight instructor, you'll be introduced to a lot of different regulations that you as a pilot will have to follow. Having a background knowledge of who these organizations are and what they do will help you to understand why they put forth the regulations that they do. So let's continue. Let's start off by talking about the Federal Aviation Administration, or the FAA. The FAA is an operating mode that falls under the larger umbrella of the Department of Transportation. The main responsibilities that the FAA has are as follows: safety regulation and promotion, airspace through the National Airspace System and air traffic management, air navigation facilities such as VORs, encouraging and developing civil aeronautics and new aviation technology. The FAA is empowered by Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations titled Aeronautics in Space. In a future lesson, we will go into more detail about the applicable regulations that you will need to know for your knowledge test as well as your check ride, and how they will affect you as a pilot. Next, we will talk about FAA offices. The FAA is headquartered in Washington, D.C., and a large part of the FAA is Flight Standard Service. The Flight Standard Service promotes safe air transportation by setting the standards for certification and oversight of airmen, air operators, air agencies, and designees. FSS also promotes safety of flight of civil aircraft and air commerce by accomplishing certification, inspection, surveillance, investigation, and enforcement. FSS sets the standards and regulations that we must follow as pilots at all times, and FSS manages the system for registration of civil aircraft and certification of airmen. In a future lesson, we will go into more depth on the required documents that an airplane must have in order to be airworthy, or in other words, the documents that are required for us to legally fly that airplane. Flight Standard District Offices, or FSDOs, are field offices for the FAA. Throughout the United States, there's about 80 locations, so more than likely you will have a FSDO in your area. You can contact your local FSDO for reporting low-flying aircraft, accident reporting, air carrier certification and operations, aircraft maintenance, aircraft operational issues, permits, airman certification for pilots, mechanics, repairmen, dispatchers, and riggers, certification and modification issues for aircraft, enforcement of airmen and aircraft regulations, and to report illegal air charters. These FSDOs can be a great resource for you as a student pilot going through your training. You can reach out to your FSDO if you have any questions about any regulations that you don't understand or you need more clarification on. Nowadays, the FSDOs are relieving some of their responsibilities for certain things. For example, if you want to apply for certain certificates, instead of going to the FSDO to do that, they will ask you to reach out to an designated pilot examiner, or DPE, to fulfill that paperwork and to submit that for you. Next, we will talk about the International Civil Aviation Organization, or the ICAO. The ICAO is an agency within the United Nations that serves 193 countries with the goal of safer aviation throughout the world. They do this through their strategic objectives, which are safety, air navigation capacity and efficiency, security and facilitation, economic development of air transport, and environmental protection. The ICAO has no enforcement power of its own. Instead, here within the United States, that authority lies with the FAA. It is the policy, however, of the FAA to conform to ICAO standards and recommended practices. The United States was a founding member of the International Civil Aviation Organization, and as such, the FAA and ICAO have a great working relationship to put forth standards and recommended practices that will lead to the highest level of aviation safety. Next up is the National Transportation Safety Board, or the NTSB. The NTSB investigates every civil aviation accident within the United States and significant accidents in other modes of transportation under the Department of Transportation. Based on their findings and studies, the board makes recommendations aimed at preventing future accidents. These recommendations may make their way to updated federal aviation regulations. They might put these recommendations forth through advisory circulars and other publications. We as pilots must follow reporting procedures that the NTSB sets forth. This is commonly referred to as NTSB 830 reporting requirements, which we will cover in a future lesson. All right, the last agency that we'll be talking about in today's lesson is the Transportation Security Administration, or the TSA. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the Transportation Security Administration. If you've flown through larger airports, I'm sure you've experienced going through the security line, scanning your boarding pass, taking your shoes off, having to get your baggage x-rayed, going through a machine, all that fun stuff. Luckily, as student pilots, we don't have to do that before we fly each time. However, the TSA does require that your flight instructor issue you a TSA endorsement. All you'll need to do for this, if you're a United States citizen, is provide proof of citizenship, whether that's your birth certificate and driver's license, to your instructor, and then they will issue that endorsement in your logbook. They will also fill out a section on your student pilot application to confirm that, and then you can be issued your temporary student pilot certificate. If you're not a United States citizen, then you actually have to get authorization directly from the TSA before you can begin your flight training. You start that process through the TSA's website, and your flight school will validate that you are interested in training. You'll have to pay a fee to the TSA and submit fingerprints. But once that is all completed, you will be issued your authorization from the TSA, and you can start your flight training. Hopefully, going over these 4 agencies will be useful to you as we continue ground school. In future lessons, when we talk about the FAA, NTSB, ICAO, you'll have a deeper understanding of who they are and what they do. So when we're going over certain regulations, it'll make a little bit more sense as to what the goals of those regulations are. Well, thank you for joining me for Lesson 1, and we'll see you in Lesson 2.